I knew from the moment I moved into this neighborhood that I had made a mistake. The houses were nice, the lawns were pristine, but lurking beneath the well-manicured exterior was a homeowners association, HOA, run by one of the most insufferable people I had ever met, Karen Whitmore. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the HOA. She had a clipboard practically glued to her hands and a permanent scowl whenever she looked in my direction. I had the audacity to move into this neighborhood as a single man in my 30s, without a wife, without kids, and worst of all, without any patience for HOA nonsense. The first time we clashed was over my garbage bins. Apparently, leaving them on the curb 1 hour past pickup was an unforgivable offense. Then it was my grass, which she claimed was 1 inch too tall. But the final straw, the thing that really set Karen off, was my car. I had an old, restored Mustang, a beautiful 1969 fastback that I had put years of work into. It was my pride and joy. I parked it in my driveway because my garage was filled with tools and equipment for my side gig as a mechanic. Karen, however, had a rule about unsightly vehicles being left outside. "You need to park that thing inside," she snapped one afternoon as I was washing it. I wiped the soap off my hands and turned to face her. "My car is registered, insured, and in perfect condition. I'm allowed to park it in my own driveway." Karen scoffed. "The HOA guidelines prohibit vehicles from being left outside overnight unless they are standard commuter cars. That means sedans, SUVs, and trucks. Not that." I chuckled. "Karen, you're not the law. And that rule is ridiculous." Her face turned red. "You'll regret this." I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. A few days later, I walked out to my car in the morning, coffee in hand, ready to head to work. The second my tires rolled down the driveway, I felt it thud, thud, thump. My car jerked violently to the side as I heard the unmistakable hiss of air escaping my tires. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, and jumped out. That's when I saw them. Spike strips. My eyes widened as I crouched down and inspected the damage. Both of my front tires were ruined. The jagged metal teeth had torn straight through the rubber. I spun around, scanning the street. No one was outside, but I knew who was responsible. I stormed over to Karen's house and pounded on her door. It took a few seconds, but she finally opened it, looking entirely too smug for my liking. "Problem?" she asked sweetly. I pointed at my car. "You did this." Karen tilted her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." My blood boiled. "Karen, that's felony-level property damage." She waved a dismissive hand. "Maybe if you followed the rules, your car wouldn't be such a hazard." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You put spike strips on my driveway." She shrugged. "HOA guidelines say vehicles must be parked properly. You didn't listen. Actions have consequences." I clenched my fists. I wanted to scream at her, but I had a better idea. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Sheriff's office, this is Deputy Williams," a familiar voice answered. "Hey, Mark," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Got a situation at my place. Some very illegal spike strips just ruined my tires." There was silence for a moment. Then, his tone turned sharp. "Did you say spike strips?" "Yep." "On your property?" "Uh-huh. I'll be there in 10. I ended the call and smiled at Karen. "Hope you didn't have any plans today." Her smug expression faltered. "What did you just do?" I crossed my arms. "I called the sheriff. My old buddy Mark. You might remember him. He doesn't take kindly to booby traps." Her face drained of color. You can't prove it was me." I grinned. "You have cameras, right?" She froze. "Yeah, see, that's the funny thing about people like you," I continued. "You love watching everyone else, but forget that means your own cameras are always rolling." Karen slammed her door shut, but it was too late. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Sheriff Mark Williams stepped out, looking every bit the no-nonsense lawman he was. He took one look at the spike strips and let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered, shaking his head. "People are real stupid sometimes." Karen must have been watching from her window because, like clockwork, she stepped outside, arms crossed. "Officer, This is all just a misunderstanding. Mark sighed, pulling out his notepad. Karen, you put illegal spike strips on private property. You know how serious that is? She waved her hands frantically. It's just a small enforcement tool. He was violating the HOA rules. Mark stared at her. That's not how the law works. She gulped. But Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for property damage and reckless endangerment, he announced, pulling out his cuffs. Karen gasped. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. Mark chuckled. Well, you're about to be the HOA president with a criminal record. I stood by my car, watching as Karen was handcuffed and led to the patrol car, sputtering protests the entire time. As Mark shoved her inside, he turned back to me. Want me to tow the car to your shop so you can fix the tires? I smiled. That'd be great. Karen shrieked from the back seat. You'll regret this. I waved. See you at the HOA meeting, Karen. Mark chuckled as he shut the car door. Some people never learn. Karen was gone, but the chaos she left behind was just beginning. After Sheriff Mark drove her off in cuffs, the neighborhood came alive. Blinds lifted, doors cracked open, and within minutes, my nosy neighbors were gathering in small groups, whispering furiously. Mrs. Thompson from 3 doors down was the first to approach me. She clutched her pearl necklace like she was watching a scandalous soap opera unfold in real life. Did I just see Karen getting arrested? She gasped. I smirked, crossing my arms. Yep. Turns out, dropping spike strips on someone's driveway is illegal. Who knew? A murmur spread through the small crowd forming on my lawn. Some faces looked gleeful, while others seemed genuinely nervous. HOA presidents didn't usually get hauled off by the sheriff in broad daylight. Mr. Jensen, a gruff retired Marine, chuckled and slapped me on the back. Been waiting years for someone to put that woman in her place. I wasn't about to celebrate too soon, though. Karen might have been in custody, but people like her didn't just go down quietly. I had a feeling this was far from over. By the next morning, word had spread like wildfire. Karen was released on bail, and the HOA board, mostly made up of her cronies, was already scrambling to spin the situation. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for that evening. Now, I wasn't the kind of guy who usually gave a damn about HOA meetings. But after the stunt Karen pulled, I had every intention of showing up. When I arrived at the clubhouse, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. A few board members shot me dirty looks, while others refused to meet my gaze. The room buzzed with hushed conversations, everyone waiting to see what was going to happen next. Karen, somehow, was still acting like she ran the place. She sat at the front of the room, looking defiant despite the fact that she had literal criminal charges hanging over her head. Her smug expression made my blood boil. "Let's get this meeting started," she said, banging her gavel like she was some kind of judge. Mr. Peterson, one of the only sane board members, cleared his throat. "Karen, maybe it's best if someone else leads this meeting." "I'm the HOA president," she snapped. "I'll lead the meeting." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, waiting to see how this train wreck would unfold. Karen launched into a speech about unruly homeowners and preserving the integrity of the neighborhood, completely ignoring the fact that she was the one who had committed a literal crime. Then, she dropped the real bombshell. As of this morning, she announced, the HOA board has voted to impose a special assessment fine on Mr. Walker for violations of our parking policies. A stunned silence fell over the room. I blinked. "Excuse me?" Karen folded her hands, looking pleased with herself. "Your Mustang was illegally parked outside for several nights. As per HOA regulations, we are fining you $5,000. The room exploded in murmurs. Even some of her usual supporters looked uncomfortable. I let out a slow, incredulous laugh. "You tried to destroy my car, got arrested for it, and now you're trying to fine me?" Karen smirked. "Actions have consequences." "Oh, she wanted to play dirty? Fine." I stood up and pulled a thick manila folder from my bag, holding it up for the entire room to see. "Great speech, Karen," I said, my voice dripping with amusement. "But let's talk about your actions, shall we?" I flipped open the folder and spread out copies of the police report, crime scene photos, and HOA bylaws on the table. Then I delivered the killing blow. I had a nice long chat with my lawyer today, I continued. Turns out, an HOA president committing felony property damage while on HOA business opens the entire association up to a massive lawsuit. And if you keep targeting me, I'll make sure this HOA gets buried in legal fees. Karen's face went pale. Mr. Peterson, looking increasingly uncomfortable, adjusted his glasses. Karen, is this true? She stammered. This is a smear campaign. I turned to the room. Let me make this simple. Either you drop this bogus fine, or I'll see you all in court. Oh, and by the way, I'm also filing a motion to have Karen removed as HOA president. The room erupted. Karen spluttered, trying to regain control, but it was over. One by one, even her loyal board members started turning on her. They didn't sign up for legal liability just because Karen had a vendetta. Mr. Peterson raised his hand. I motioned to revoke the fine against Mr. Walker. A chorus of agreements followed. The vote passed overwhelmingly. Then, a second motion. I also motioned for Karen Whitmore to be removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Karen's eyes widened. You can't. The vote was swift. And just like that, Karen was dethroned. Karen wasn't going down without a fight, though. Over the next few days, she tried everything, threatening lawsuits, screaming at neighbors, even attempting to rig the next election to regain her position. But her power was gone. A few weeks later, she quietly put her house up for sale. As I stood in my driveway, watching the moving trucks pull away, I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served. And my Mustang? Still parked right where it belonged. For a few glorious weeks, the neighborhood was peaceful. Karen had slithered away after losing her power, her house sitting empty with a "for sale" sign swaying in the breeze. The new HOA president, Mr. Peterson, was actually reasonable, and for the first time since moving in, I felt like I could breathe. But peace never lasts. One morning, as I stepped out to grab my mail, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. Karen. Not moving back in, thankfully, but standing on the sidewalk across the street, arms crossed, watching my house like some sort of vengeful HOA specter. My fingers clenched around my mail. What the hell is she doing here? She didn't say a word. Just smirked, snapped a photo of my house with her phone, and strutted off down the street. Oh, great. This wasn't over. A few weeks later, Karen's house was finally sold. I was ecstatic until I met the new owners. A married couple in their late 50s, Harold and Linda Monroe. They seemed friendly enough at first, but something about them felt off. Maybe it was the way Harold gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "We like order around here." Maybe it was the way Linda's eyes flickered toward my Mustang in the driveway with barely concealed distaste. Or maybe it was the fact that they were close, personal friends of Karen. Yep. Turns out, Karen hadn't actually left. She had just moved down the street and was now using her friends as her proxies to continue her HOA reign of terror. I found out the hard way when I got a violation notice in the mail the next week. Dear homeowner, you are in violation of HOA regulations regarding the prolonged outdoor parking of non-standard vehicles. If this violation is not corrected within 48 hours, further action will be taken. Sincerely, the HOA board. My jaw dropped. Karen might not have been the president anymore, but she still had her claws in the HOA. And she was coming for me. I wasn't about to let Karen and her minions push me around again. So, I dug in. First, I went through the HOA bylaws line by line. I found the exact clause they were trying to use against me. Some vague nonsense about non-standard vehicles detracting from the aesthetic value of the neighborhood. Nowhere did it actually say I couldn't park my car in my own driveway. It was just another power move. So, I sent them a letter. Dear HOA Board, per HOA regulations, my vehicle is registered, insured, and maintained in pristine condition, meaning it does not violate any outlined policies. Any further harassment regarding this matter will be met with legal action. Sincerely, Walker. 2 days later, another violation notice arrived. They weren't backing down. Fine. Time to escalate. I knew exactly how to deal with this. See, HOAs love throwing rules at homeowners, but the one thing they hate? Being under a legal microscope. So, I did what any sane, revenge-driven homeowner would do. I started digging into the HOA's finances. Public records, expense reports, past fines issued, anything I could find. And oh boy, I found something juicy. Over $20,000 in misallocated funds. It wasn't just Karen running the HOA like a personal dictatorship. She and her little HOA cronies had been misusing funds for years. Expensive dinners labeled as community development meetings, unnecessary, landscaping fees that just so happened to go to Karen's nephew's company. It was fraud. And I had proof. So I did what any responsible homeowner would do. I anonymously forwarded the entire report to the state's Homeowners Association Oversight Committee, and then I waited. It took 3 weeks for the hammer to drop. But when it did, it was glorious. First, the HOA board got hit with a state audit. Officials combed through every expense, every financial report, and it wasn't long before the entire neighborhood found out what was happening. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. Karen and her lackeys sat at the front of the clubhouse, pale as ghosts, as state investigators grilled them. Residents were furious. Homeowners who had been nickel-and-dimed for years were demanding answers. And then, the final nail in the coffin, the HOA was dissolved. Yep, gone. Karen and her cronies had screwed up so badly that the neighborhood voted to disband the HOA entirely. No more Karen. No more pointless fines. No more harassment over my damn driveway. And the best part? Karen was facing potential criminal charges for financial misconduct. With the HOA dead, the neighborhood actually became a better place. People stopped worrying about their grass being half an inch too long. No more ridiculous fines. And best of all, I could park my Mustang wherever the hell I wanted. As for Karen, she tried to play the victim, of course, blaming everyone but herself. But with an official investigation looming over her and her reputation in tatters, she finally did what we'd all been hoping for. She moved. Packed up and left in the dead of night. And the next morning, as I stood on my driveway, coffee in hand, I smiled. For the first time since moving here, I finally felt at home. A few months later, I was working in my garage when I heard a car pull up. I glanced outside. A new car. A sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize. A woman stepped out. Not Karen. But something about her seemed familiar. She smirked, adjusted her designer sunglasses, and walked up to my driveway. "Hello, Mr. Walker," she said smoothly. "I'm Emily Whitmore." My stomach sank. Karen's daughter. And just like that, the nightmare wasn't over. I stood there, gripping the wrench in my hand, staring at Emily Whitmore like she had just crawled out of a horror movie sequel. She looked just like Karen, same sharp features, same smug smirk, even the same condescending way she adjusted her sunglasses. I exhaled slowly. "Here we go again." "Let me guess," I said, leaning against my car. "You're here to tell me you're moving in?" She laughed, a cold, calculated laugh. "Oh no. I have no intention of living in this quaint little neighborhood." "Then what do you want?" She took a slow step forward, looking around like she was surveying her future territory. "I came to introduce myself," she said smoothly. "After all, my mother left quite the mess behind, didn't she?" I folded my arms. "If by mess, you mean the HOA fraud, the spike strip incident, and her getting run out of town, then yeah. Pretty big mess." Emily tilted her head, unfazed. "You're funny, Mr. Walker. But let's not pretend you don't know why I'm really here." I narrowed my eyes. "Enlighten me." She smirked. "I'm a real estate developer. And I just bought the entire HOA's former assets. The clubhouse, the park, the private roads, all of it." My jaw tightened. "You did what?" She held up a thick envelope and handed it to me. I ripped it open and scanned the contents. It was a notice of intent. Emily wasn't just buying the HOA's former property, she was planning on reinstating the HOA. And this time, she'd have total control. I looked up from the papers. You really think people are gonna let you bring the HOA back after what your mother did? Emily smiled. Oh, I don't need their permission. See, I didn't just buy the land. I bought the rights to the old HOA charter. I clenched my teeth. That charter was dissolved when Karen got exposed. She waved a hand dismissively. Yes, yes. But there's a loophole. The HOA technically still exists on paper. It was just inactive. Now that I own the majority of the assets, I can reactivate it. And once I do, well, let's just say I'll be rewriting the rules. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just another Karen situation. Emily wasn't an unhinged busybody throwing around fines and yelling about trash cans. She was smart, calculated, and she had money, a lot of it. Why are you telling me this? I asked, gripping the papers. What do you want from me? Her smirk widened. Oh, nothing yet. I just thought you should know that, very soon, your little victory is going to be undone. She slid her sunglasses back on. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts, Mr. Walker. Then she turned on her heel, got into her car, and drove off, leaving me standing there, heart pounding, knowing that the war was far from over. The second Emily was out of sight, I went into full damage control mode. I grabbed my phone and started calling everyone. First up, Sheriff Mark. Let me get this straight, he said after I explained the situation. Karen's daughter is trying to bring back the HOA? Not trying doing it, I corrected. She's already got the property rights and the damn charter. It's a legal loophole. Mark cursed under his breath. That's bad. Real bad. You think she can pull it off? A sigh. If she's got the money and the right lawyers? Yeah, it's possible. I ran a hand through my hair. So what do we do? Mark paused, then said, we don't do anything. But you? You need to get the neighborhood on your side. Because if she brings that HOA back and people support it, you're screwed. He was right. I needed to rally the neighbors before Emily got her claws into them. So, I spent the next week knocking on doors, calling meetings, and warning people about what was coming. Some were hesitant. HOAs had their perks, but once I reminded them of what happened with Karen, people started listening. I wasn't the only one who enjoyed the freedom of a non-HOA neighborhood. No more petty fines. No more ridiculous rules. People didn't want to go back. By the time Emily officially filed her paperwork to reactivate the HOA, we had a plan. Emily thought she could just steamroll her way in and take over. But she underestimated one thing. Me. See, while she was busy throwing around legal jargon and buying up properties, I had been gathering signatures. It turns out, while Emily did technically have a loophole to revive the HOA, there was another loophole. One that let the homeowners vote to block it. All I needed was 51% of the neighborhood to sign a petition rejecting the new HOA. And guess what? I got 67%. When Emily showed up to her first official HOA meeting, all dressed up like a corporate queen ready to reclaim her empire, she was met with a giant stack of signed petitions. I watched her face fall as she flipped through the pages. This isn't legal, she stammered. Oh, it is, I said, grinning. We did our research. Majority rule, baby. Your little HOA comeback? Dead on arrival. The neighborhood cheered. Emily fumed. And just like that, her grand plan crumbled. Emily fought it, of course. Tried to threaten lawsuits, tried to buy people out, even tried to smear me as some kind of troublemaker who was anti-community. But the people weren't buying it. Within a month, she cut her losses and put her property up for sale. The day the for sale sign went up, I stood on my driveway, watching as she packed up her fancy car and drove away. For good. This time, there were no surprise comebacks. No HOA nightmares lurking around the corner. Just peace and quiet. And my Mustang? Still parked right where it belonged. Months later, things were back to normal. No HOA. No Karen. No Emily. But one day, while working in my garage, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. No name. Just a single sheet of paper with 5 words. You haven't seen the last. I stared at it, then chuckled, shaking my head. Some people never learn. The letter sat on my workbench for days. No return address. No name. Just those 5 cryptic words. You haven't seen the last. I knew it had to be from Emily. Who else would bother? But what was her game this time? She had lost. The HOA was gone. Her grand scheme had been shut down before it even started. But something in my gut told me she wasn't finished. Still, I refused to play into her drama. I tossed the letter into a drawer and went about my business. Until the strange things started happening. It started small. First, I noticed a black SUV parked down the street. Not every day, but often enough that it stood out. It never parked in front of the same house twice. Sometimes it was at the end of the cul-de-sac, sometimes closer. Always just sitting there, watching. Then, there were the mysterious HOA violation notices appearing in people's mailboxes. Except there was no HOA. I wasn't the only one getting them. A few of my neighbors knocked on my door, holding up letters that looked official, stamped with an HOA logo that no longer existed. Each letter had the same nonsense. Grass must be trimmed to HOA standard height. No vehicles older than 10 years may be parked in driveways overnight. Trash cans must be brought inside within 30 minutes of pickup. It was Karen-era bullshit all over again. Someone was trying to scare the neighborhood. And I had a pretty good idea who. I called Sheriff Mark. "Emily's at it again," I said. He sighed. "What now?" I told him about the fake notices. The phantom HOA violations. The black SUV. Mark listened, then grumbled. "Damn it. I thought she was gone for good." "She is. But she's still pulling the strings from somewhere." He agreed to look into the notices, but something told me Emily was too smart to leave a direct trail. So, I decided to do some digging myself. I needed to know who was behind the fake HOA notices. So, I did something bold. I violated one of the rules. I left my Mustang in the driveway overnight. If someone was trying to enforce the fake HOA, they'd have to do something about it. Sure enough, the next morning, there was a new violation notice taped to my garage door. But this one was different. It wasn't just a letter. It was an official-looking fine. $250 due within 7 days or legal action will be taken. At the bottom, there was a P.O. box listed as the payment address. Gotcha. I took the notice straight to Mark. "This is fraud," he said, shaking his head. "Someone's running a scam." "Not someone. Emily." We pulled up the P.O. box registration, and guess what? It was rented under the name E. Whitmore, LLC. Emily had set up a fake HOA company and was trying to scare people into paying bogus fines. Mark grinned. "That's mail fraud, wire fraud, and about 5 other felonies. I'll take care of it." It didn't take long for things to fall apart for Emily. When word got out that the HOA fines were fake, people were furious. Neighbors who had already paid were demanding refunds. Some were threatening lawsuits. And then came the police warrant. Mark and his deputies raided Emily's fake HOA office, a cheap rental space downtown. They confiscated files, computers, and a whole stack of forged violation letters. Emily was arrested for mail fraud and attempted extortion. This time, she wasn't getting off with a slap on the wrist. A month later, Emily was officially charged. Facing multiple felonies, she took a plea deal, fines, probation, and a permanent ban from operating any HOA-related business. The neighborhood celebrated. With Emily gone for good, the fake violations stopped. The SUV disappeared. The HOA nightmare was finally over. And me? I got one last letter. Not from Emily this time. From the real government. A notice that read, "The property known as the HOA Clubhouse has been officially rezoned for community use. No HOA may be reinstated in this neighborhood without a majority vote." It was over. For good. Months later, I was back in my garage, working on my Mustang, when I heard a knock on my door. It was Mr. Peterson, the former HOA board member. He grinned. "You did it. No more HOA nonsense. No more Whitmores." I laughed. "Took long enough." He glanced at my car. "Guess that means you're never moving it into the garage, huh?" I smirked. "Not a chance." And with that, the HOA war was finally over. No more Karens. No more Emilis. Just me, my car, and the peace and quiet I had fought for. And if anyone ever tried to bring back the HOA, they'd have to go through me. For a while, things were quiet. No HOA. No Karen. No Emily. Just a normal neighborhood where people could park where they wanted, cut their grass when they felt like it, and live their lives without fear of a clipboard-wielding tyrant. Then one day, I got a phone call. "Walker, it's Mark." I frowned. "What's up, Sheriff?" "You're not gonna like this," he said. "I just got a call from a developer." My stomach twisted. "What kind of developer?" "The kind that just bought 20 acres of land right outside your neighborhood." I clenched my jaw. "And let me guess, they want to build a new HOA community?" Mark sighed. "Not just any HOA. A master-planned HOA. Think gated communities, private security, mandatory fees, the whole 9 yards." I groaned, rubbing my temples. "You've gotta be kidding me." "Nope," Mark said. "And guess who's rumored to be consulting on the project?" I closed my eyes, already knowing the answer. Emily Whitmore. Over the next few weeks, signs started going up. "Coming soon, Oak Ridge Estates, a premier HOA community." Construction crews rolled in. Land was cleared. New houses were being built at lightning speed. The HOA plague wasn't dead. It was just moving in next door. At first, I thought, fine. Let them do their thing over there. As long as they stay out of our neighborhood, I don't care. But then the letters started coming again. Not fake this time. Real, legally backed HOA proposals. The developers were trying to annex our neighborhood into their new HOA. See, here's the thing, developers love absorbing existing neighborhoods into their HOAs. Why? Because it means more houses under their control, higher property values for them, more homeowners paying their ridiculous fees. And the worst part? They had a loophole. If 51% of homeowners signed up, our neighborhood would be absorbed into Oak Ridge Estates. That meant mandatory fees, new rules, more HOA bullsh *T. And Emily, once again, calling the shots. I wasn't about to let that happen. So, I gathered the neighborhood. We had fought Karen. We had fought Emily. Now, we had to fight corporate America. One afternoon, while working on my Mustang, I noticed a brand new black SUV pull up in front of my house. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. Slicked back hair, fake smile. Pure businessman. I wiped my hands on a rag and watched as he approached. "Mr. Walker?" he said smoothly. "That's me," I replied. "What do you want?" He pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside was a buyout offer. $200,000 cash if I agreed to sign my house into the new HOA. I laughed out loud. "You think you can just buy me off?" He smirked. "Everyone has a price." I handed the folder back. "Yeah? Well, here's mine, leave us the hell alone." His smirk faltered. "Mr. Walker, be reasonable. Oak Ridge Estates is going to be the premier community in this area. The property values will skyrocket. You're the only thing standing in the way of progress." I stepped closer. "Buddy, I don't care about your fancy HOA. I don't want your rules. And I sure as hell don't want Emily Whitmore running anything near me. So take your money and get off my property." His fake smile vanished. "That's a shame," he said. "You could have made things easy." Then he turned, got back in his SUV, and drove off. That's when I realized this was war. The next day, my mailbox was stuffed with new HOA interest letters. Then came the real estate agents, knocking on doors, trying to convince my neighbors that joining the HOA would raise their home values. And then, the sabotage started. Somehow, my power got shut off in the middle of the night. A few days later, my water mysteriously stopped working. Someone even tried to tow my Mustang, claiming it was abandoned. This wasn't just a corporate buyout. This was a full-scale intimidation campaign. And I wasn't about to back down. I gathered my neighbors for one final vote. If we got more than 51% of homeowners to reject the annexation, we could legally block Oak Ridge Estates from taking over. The problem? The developers had already convinced a lot of people. We were neck and neck. Then, on the night of the vote, Emily showed up. Dressed in a sharp power suit, standing at the front of the meeting like she still owned the place. She smiled sweetly at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we're here today to discuss the future of this neighborhood. A future that involves security, property value growth, and prestige. The future of Oak Ridge Estates. She paused, letting her words sink in. Now, I know some of you are hesitant. You've heard rumors, lies, fear-mongering from certain individuals. Her eyes flicked toward me. But I assure you, joining Oak Ridge Estates is the best thing for you and your families. You'll have private security, exclusive amenities, and best of all, a return to order. I stepped forward. You mean a return to Karen-style rule, right? I shot back. Fines for parking in your own driveway. Rules about how short your grass needs to be. More control over how people live their lives. Emily's smile didn't waver. We're simply ensuring harmony. I turned to the crowd. How many of you remember Karen? How many of you remember the fines, the harassment, the corruption? People murmured. Heads nodded. Emily is just Karen 2.0, I continued. And if you sign on to this HOA, you're giving up your freedom. A long pause. Then, the vote was cast. Final tally. 64% rejected the HOA. Emily's face went pale. The developers had lost. We had won. Again. With the neighborhood rejecting the HOA, the developers backed out of the project. Emily, humiliated once again, disappeared. This time for good. The next morning, I stepped outside, coffee in hand, looking at my victorious Mustang sitting in my driveway. I grinned. No HOA. No fines. No more Karen. No more Emily. This time for real. And if anyone ever tried again, they'd have to go through me. For a while, things were peaceful. No HOA. No scheming developers. No ridiculous fines appearing in people's mailboxes. Just quiet. I thought we had finally won. Then, one morning, I stepped outside to grab my mail, only to find a notice taped to my front door. My stomach sank. It wasn't an HOA violation this time. It was a court summons. I was being sued. And the plaintiff? Emily Whitmore. I took the papers inside, sat down, and read them carefully. Emily wasn't just suing me, she was suing the entire neighborhood. Her claim? That our vote to reject the HOA was invalid due to misinformation and coordinated efforts to defame her. She was seeking $500,000 in damages for reputational harm, a court order to force a revote on the HOA decision, my immediate eviction from the neighborhood for being a disruptive element. I let out a slow, exasperated breath. Emily wasn't trying to win. She was trying to bleed us dry. And if we didn't fight back, she just might succeed. I called Sheriff Mark first. She's suing you? He exclaimed. Not just me, the whole damn neighborhood. Mark cursed under his breath. She's desperate. She couldn't win the HOA fight, so now she's trying to weaponize the legal system. I sighed. Yeah, and if we don't fight back, she's gonna scare people into giving in. So, I did the only thing I could do. I called a lawyer. I met with Elliot Grayson, an attorney known for tearing apart HOA cases. He was a no-nonsense guy, mid-50s, gray suit, the kind of lawyer who lived off coffee and pure spite. I handed him the lawsuit. He skimmed it, snorted, then tossed it onto his desk. This is garbage, he said. Yeah, but she's got money. And she wants to drag us through the mud. He cracked his knuckles. Then let's bury her first. Elliot went on the offensive. First, he filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that Emily's lawsuit was frivolous and nothing more than a revenge stunt. Then, he hit her with a counter-lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and malicious prosecution. We weren't just going to defend ourselves. We were going to make her regret ever stepping foot in this neighborhood again. And that's when we found the smoking gun. While preparing our case, Elliot's team got their hands on some very interesting emails. Emails from Emily to the developers, sent before she even bought the land. And in those emails, she admitted that the whole HOA revival was a sham. She called it a hostile takeover. She admitted she didn't care about the community. She planned to drive out problem residents, aka me, to bring in better homeowners. In short, we had proof that she had been trying to rig the whole thing from the start. Elliot grinned when he saw the emails. Oh, we're gonna destroy her. The day of the hearing, Emily walked in with her fancy lawyers, 3 of them, all in designer suits. She looked confident. Smug. Like she had already won. Then we played the emails. Her face went pale. Her lawyers scrambled, trying to object, trying to backtrack, but it was too late. The judge leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Miss Whitmore, can you explain this?" Emily stammered. Those emails are being taken out of context." The judge didn't look convinced. Then Elliot dropped the final bomb. "We're also filing a motion for sanctions against Miss Whitmore for abusing the legal system." Emily's lawyers visibly panicked. "See, filing a bogus lawsuit just to bully people? Judges hate that." And within minutes, the judge made his ruling. Emily's lawsuit? Dismissed with prejudice. That meant she couldn't refile it. Our counter-lawsuit? Moving forward. Emily? She was on the hook for all legal fees plus damages for harassment. After the ruling, Emily vanished. No more black SUVs. No more fake HOAs. No more shady business deals. Word spread fast. Her investors pulled out. Her business collapsed. And within a month, she sold her house and disappeared. For real this time. No more Karens. No more HOAs. Just me, my neighbors, and the freedom we fought for. And my Mustang? Still parked right where it belonged. Months later, I got one last letter. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper. This time, though, it wasn't a threat. It was a check. A settlement check. For $250,000. Emily had settled the counter-lawsuit out of court. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. After everything she had done, asterisk asterisk all the fines, the intimidation, the lawsuits, asterisk asterisk she had ended up paying me. With a grin, I grabbed my keys, hopped in my Mustang, and drove off. Finally, after years of HOA nightmares, I could say it for certain. We had won. Life was finally normal again. No HOA. No lawsuits. No more Whitmore drama. I even used a chunk of that $250,000 settlement check to upgrade my garage, new tools, fresh paint, even a hydraulic lift. For once, things were good. Then one morning, while grabbing coffee, I noticed a moving truck pulling into Emily's old house. I figured, hey, new neighbors. Cool. Then I saw who stepped out of the car. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit. Sharp features. Cold eyes. Definitely not your average suburban family guy. I watched as he stood on the driveway, scanning the street like he was calculating something. That's when I saw it. The real estate sign on the front lawn. It didn't say sold. It said purchased by Whitmore and Associates. My stomach dropped. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Later that day, while changing my oil, I saw Mark's patrol car roll up. He climbed out, arms crossed. "You see the new guy yet?" he asked. I wiped my hands with a rag. "Yeah. Something about him doesn't sit right." Mark nodded. "That's because he's not just some homeowner. He's a corporate guy." I frowned. "Corporate?" Mark sighed. "His name's Vincent Crowley. He's a property developer and corporate enforcer. Runs HOA acquisitions for big investors. When neighborhoods refuse to join, he finds alternative ways to convince them." I scoffed. "Like what? More fake fines?" Mark shook his head. "Worse. Sabotage. Harassment. Forced buyouts. The guy operates like a damn HOA mafia. And guess who he used to work with?" I didn't even have to guess. Emily Whitmore. Bingo. That night, I heard footsteps outside my house. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped onto the porch, and scanned the street. Nothing. But the next morning, my garage door was covered in paint. Bright red spray paint. Sell or regret it. I clenched my fists. Oh, so that's how we're playing it? Fine. Game on. I called a neighborhood meeting. "We've dealt with HOA bullies before," I said, standing in front of the crowd. "But this guy? He's different." I laid it all out, who Crowley was, how he operated, and what he was really here for. "He's not going to file fake violations," I said. "He's going to make life hell until we give in." People murmured, nervous. Mr. Thompson spoke up. "What do we do?" I smirked. We fight back. We needed proof that Crowley was behind the threats. So, we set a trap. A few neighbors installed security cameras overnight, watching their driveways, mailboxes, and garages. And it didn't take long. 2 nights later, footage caught a masked man sneaking onto my property, spray paint in hand. The next morning, I took the footage straight to Mark. He watched it, then whistled. That's enough for vandalism charges. He smirked. Let's see how Mr. Crowley likes being on the receiving end of a legal nightmare. That evening, Mark and 2 deputies showed up at Crowley's house. I stood across the street, arms crossed, watching. Crowley opened the door, looking calm, but his eyes flickered when he saw me. Mark held up a tablet. We've got video footage linking someone from your company to vandalism on private property. Care to explain? Crowley barely blinked. That's absurd. Mark smiled. We'll let a judge decide. He handed Crowley a subpoena. You're gonna want a lawyer, Vincent. For the first time, Crowley's expression cracked. Once Crowley got hit with legal trouble, his whole scheme started crumbling. Neighbors refused to sell. More security cameras caught his agents in the act, leaving fake letters, trying to pressure homeowners. The evidence piled up. And then? The biggest bombshell of all. Turns out, Crowley wasn't just harassing us. He was stealing money from his investors. A whistleblower inside his company leaked documents to the state attorney's office. Within a month, Crowley was arrested for fraud and racketeering. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign went up in front of Crowley's house. I stood outside, watching as his fancy car was towed away. He climbed into a black SUV, but before he left, he rolled down the window. You think you won? He asked, his voice low. I smirked. I know I did. He sneered. People like me? We never really lose. I took a sip of my coffee. Yeah? Well, enjoy your prison cafeteria. His jaw clenched. Then he rolled up the window, and his SUV disappeared down the street. For good. With Crowley gone, the war was finally over. No more HOA threats. No more fake fines. No more bullies trying to take over our homes. And for the first time since I moved in, I felt safe. I sat on my porch that evening, sipping a beer, watching the sunset. No HOA. No Karen. No Emily. No Crowley. Just peace. And my Mustang? Still parked right where it belonged. For the first time in years, I could breathe. No HOA. No threats. No fake violations. Just a quiet, peaceful neighborhood where people could live their lives without some power-hungry lunatic trying to control them. Crowley was gone. Emily was gone. Karen was nothing more than a bad memory. And as I sat on my porch, watching the stars overhead, I realized something. I had won. This wasn't just about beating the HOA. This was about freedom. The freedom to park my Mustang where I wanted. The freedom to stand up against corruption. The freedom to live life on my terms. I took a deep breath, savoring the silence. No more HOA. No more battles. Just me, my neighbors, and a future where we could finally be left alone. For real. For good. And with that, the HOA nightmare was officially over.